Hey, what's up, everybody? This is Quet, and this is my video on const and let versus var in JavaScript. So essentially, JavaScript, well, let me back up. All programming languages have variables. If you're new to programming and you haven't, you're just kind of messing around with it, you're new, you haven't declared too many variables, you're not quite sure what a variable is. Essentially, a variable is something that has a name and it holds a value. Pretty similar to how you would do an algebra equation. Maybe you have x plus 8 equals 10. You would do that problem, subtract 8 from both sides, find out that x equals 2. So x is the variable and 2 is the value that it holds. And in JavaScript, I'm going to bring up my console real quick. Right? Bring up my console. In JavaScript, you could essentially do the same thing. And I'm actually going to show you a way that you should never do this is by just saying x equals 2. So that works. You have a variable. That variable is x. It has the value of 2. If I call x again here, it's going to say x equals 2. Now, you never want to make a variable in JavaScript without putting a keyword in front of it. So you never want to just say name of, this is my variable and this is what it holds. You always want to put a keyword in front of it. And for years in JavaScript, that keyword was var. So I could say var x equals 5. And now if we look at x, we see x equals 5. So that is the way for years that you would declare a variable. This is a function scope variable, var, which means that you can be declared a variable with the same name at any point inside of your code. And it can lead to a lot of bugs. I could have a variable and then forget that I even created it and create it somewhere else in the code with the same exact name, and it's not going to give me a warning and say, hey, this variable already exists. It's just going to say, okay, cool, and it's going to overwrite the other variable depending on like where it's written, and it can just lead to a lot of frustration and issues. So a few years ago, JavaScript had an upgrade, which they essentially do every year, and this was, I believe it's ECMAScript 6. I believe that's how you pronounce it, but ES6 for short. You probably hear about that all the time. It's a big buzzword. Not necessarily a buzzword, but it's a word that you hear a lot. So ES6 introduced two new ways to declare variables, and that's const and let. So with that, you just essentially put those keywords in. Const y equals 8, and then we call 8. Y we get 8, and I can do a let z equal 4, and when I call z, we get 4. So you might look at that and be like, okay, that's the same exact thing as var, just two different words. I'm still creating a variable, I'm still giving it a value, it's still working the same way. What's the big deal? Well, the thing about const and let are that they're block scope variables. Essentially, what this means is that the scope of the that variable only exists with within the curly braces that it's in. So if it's a global variable, if it's just declared on the page, it's not inside of a function or anything like that, then it's a global variable, and that's where it exists throughout the app. If it is inside of a function, it only exists inside of that function. Whereas with a variable using the var keyword, it's accessible anywhere. And so this leads to less bugs, the fact that it's block scoped, and there's a couple other nifty things about const and let that also make it a little better for you to actually use. So with const, the value of a variable that has const as the keyword is I'll say semi-immutable. And I'll get back into that later on in the video. But when I use const instead of using var, if I have a value assigned to that variable, that value cannot be changed. That variable cannot be changed. So I have x equals 5, var x equals 5. If I want to change the value of that variable, now I did say earlier you don't want to assign a variable if I was giving you a keyword, but to reassign it, you want to just call that variable name and give it a new value. So x equals 3. When we go check x out, x equals 3 now. I can change that value. I changed it before. I had x declared. I redeclared it with the var keyword. I gave it a new value. And here, I gave it a new value again, and it's updating every time. If I take this const, this y, and try to give it a new value, it's not going to work. If I say y equals 6, let me try with the space just to prove it. It's going to say assignment to constant variable. It's going to give an error. It's not going to work. You can't change it. That value is always going to be that value. And a lot of times you don't want to change the value of a certain variable. And so you want to use const. So if it accidentally it won't accidentally get changed. You won't accidentally create a variable with the same name somewhere else in your code, or somebody else used a variable and said, hey, this variable name makes sense, let me use it here. And then you work on the app and you say, hey, I have this variable called y, and I should put it here. It's going to say y already exists. So now oh, well, I need to come up with another name. I don't want to overwrite what they created. I don't want any issues. So now you get this error that pops up and says, this already exists. With let, it's kind of the same way. And with both of them, I should back up a little. You can't reassign a value. So with let, I can't say let y equal 5. It's not going to work. It's going to say y has already been declared. If I say let x equal 9, because I use var to declare that keyword, it's just going to change the value. But since I used let, and with my y variable, it's going to tell me it's already declared. It's going to tell me that I can't change that value. This is really helpful when you're working on a project with somebody else and you guys are, making your variable names and just, knocking code out, and you realize, oh, we both want to use the same variable here. This variable already exists. Or maybe you're trying to create some, you didn't see the variable that he created, and you're like, oh, he didn't create that thing. Or he or she, oh, it's not here. Let me create it. And you look and say, oh, they did create it. It's here. It's on this line. I'm getting this error. It exists somewhere. So this is a good way to kind of cut down on bugs. And with let, you can change the value. And as I stated earlier, the way that you would do that is just by calling the variable name and then giving it a value. So y equals 9. Oh, sorry, we want to use z. So if we say z equals 9, then look at z is now 9. So that value of z equals 4 is changed. So with that said, kind of a quick recap. var is a functional scope variable. It can be redeclared at any point. You can have more than one, you can't have more than one variable with the same name, but you can just override the value of x or of a var variable at any time. For const variable, that variable is always going to be the same value. It is constant. That's what the const stands for. So that value is always going to be what it is. With y, you're letting that variable hold a certain value, but that value may or may not change. So with that said, I want to show a quick example of how this might work. And I'm going to create a short app as you, a short, little snippet. If you look here, I have the Washington Wizards up on Google. They're my local basketball team. They're my favorite team. They're not doing too well this season, unfortunately. They're a little disappointing, but they had a good game last night. They beat the Rockets. I'm happy with that. And so I figured I'd make a quick video showing Const and Let first var and how that works using the Wizards as an example. So I'm going to create some variables here. So first, I'm going to create a variable called home. The Wizards with a home team. So, and I already kind of worked on this a little beforehand, so you might see the code pop up a little early. So what I did here is I created this variable called home, and that's always going to be wizards. Stay with a home team. There's no reason for me to redeclare this variable later on in this code. And another thing I'm going to point out is that when coding, you should always use const as your default variable, especially if the value of that variable isn't going to change. What that variable does, what that function does, if that's not going to change, just use const. Otherwise, if that value is going to change, you can use let. If you don't think it's going to change, and then later you go back and like, oh, that actually is going to change, you can just go back and update it from const to let. But use const by default. Use let if the value is going to change. Never use var. If there's anything in your code that use var, just maybe it's like a old legacy code that you don't need to change. It works. Let's not bother it. That's very understandable. Outside of that, always use const and let, and it's also easy at a glance. If another developer is looking at your work, they can kind of see like, oh, is this going to change? Is this a variable whose value is going to change or not? They can kind of see that at a glance. Like, oh, well, y right now equals 5. It's going to change later. Or, so I use z for let. But, z right now equals 9. But later on, it might not be 9. So that's kind of how you want to use that. So, like I said, I have this variable called wizards. I'm going to create another variable. I'm sorry, this variable called home that's equal to wizards. I'm going to have another variable called away that is equal to rockets. Sorry, I like single quotes. So away equals rockets. They were the away team. And then, so both of these variables are never going to change. It's always going to be wizards, always going to be rockets. I'm going to create something that's going to change here, and that's going to be home points. So at the start of the game, neither team has any points. So home points is going to be 0. Then we're going to have away points. We're going to set that value to 0 as well. Start them off on even footing. And then we're going to set winner equal to false. So essentially we have the two teams pitted against each other. It's both still to 0. There's no winner yet. This winner variable is also going to be representative for the home team. It's equal to false. They haven't won until the game ends and the score is higher than the away team. So I'm going to create a few variables here. Functions here really quickly. Again, if you're new and you've never created a function before, a function is kind of a mini program inside of your program that runs and it carries out a set of instructions. So there's a couple different ways to create a function. The way that I'm doing today is just using the keyword function, giving it a name. I'm going to set this one to shot. You're going to use these curly braces here. These parentheses. There may or may not be a value inside of these parentheses at times. Those are called parameters. Today we're not going to use any parameters. And then you use a curly brace to start. And then you write your code that you want to run. So there's going to be a closing pair of curly braces. And everything inside of the curly braces, that's the code, that's the small program that's going to run every time that this function is called. And for this, we just want to return home points plus equals 2. What this does is it's going to increase the value of home points by 2 every time the function is called. To call a function, you just type out its name. You use these parentheses. If there's any parameters, you'll plug those in, but today there's no parameters, so we're not going to worry about that. We're just going to call shot. It adds 2 to home points. If we call it multiple times, we see the value goes up. And if we take a look at home points here, we see that the value of home points is 12. So as I stated earlier, home points is using let because this value is going to change. And when we look, we're using this this function here to add 2 to home points, and home points is literally changing on the fly every time this is called. So I'm going to create another function here, follow the same idea, and this is for 3-pointer. And we're going to make home points plus or equal to 3, since this is a 3-point shot. And close this off. We're going to call 3-pointer. And then we have 3 points added every time that is called. If we go back and look at home points, we're going to see that the value of home points is 24 now. So this is essentially showing you that we have our variables home and away that are never changing. We have these values that may or may not change. And I've shown you how to change them with some functions. And now let's say we're going to kind of fast forward here, and we're going to set away points to 131, since that's how many points the Rockets scored last night. And remember, we can't just say let away points equal 131. We're going to get an error. It's going to say that away points has already been declared. We don't want to redeclare the value. We want to just assign it a new value. So in order to do that, we just say away points. We give it the value of 131. And boom, it's there. If we take a look at away points now, we see that it's 131. So we're going to do the same thing really quickly with home points. We're going to give the Wizards the 135 points that they scored last night, and we have home points set to 135. Actually, no, we're going to set home points to 131 as well, right? So home points is 131. We're going to create another function here called final score, right? Or final, just final. So we have function, final, and we're going to make a conditional statement. A conditional statement, basically, we're going to use if else. If this is true, then carry out this code, else carry out another code. So basically here, you write if, you have your parentheses here, and we're going to say if home points is greater than away points, then we're going to have our curly braces. And remember, this is the same thing as with the functions we made earlier. Everything inside of the curly braces are instructions. That's going to return, I'm sorry, if I go back and look, winner. Winner is going to return a winner, but it's going to set that value to true. Else, so if that's not true, if home points isn't greater than away points, we're just going to return winner, which is already set to false. So if we're to run this now, when the score is tied up at 131 apiece, take a look at the away points, it's 131. Take a look at home points, it's 131. If we run final, it's going to say false. The Wizards have not won. This is not true. It's just returning the value of winner, which is currently false. Now if we change home points to 135, and then we run final again, it's true. The Wizards won. They have the highest score. Home points is higher than away points. So this pretty much demonstrates everything that I've said before, but there's one last thing that I want to throw in there, and that's how earlier I said that const is semi-immutable. Being immutable means that the value of something is not going to change. And as I said earlier, when you use constant, the variable doesn't change. The value of that variable does not change. However, if you're using something like an array or an object, the value of the keys may change. So I have a quick example to show you. To show you how that works. If it gets a little confusing, don't worry too much about it. Just keep in your head that the value of a const variable is not going to change. And over time, you'll get more comfortable and familiar with the idea that, oh, it does change kind of if you have an array or object. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create a object here called player1. I'm going to assign a key called first player. I'm going to put John, called first name, sorry. I'm going to put John, last name, Wall. His jersey number is 2. And his position is point guard. We're also going to say if he's active or not, which we're going to put true for right now. We're going to say that, yes, he's active, he's in a game, he's playing, he's not on the bench taking a break. And if we call this this object here, we'll return all of the data that we put in. First name is John, last name Wall, number 2, position point guard, active, true. And remember, this is a const. This variable player1 contains an object, and its object has 5 different keys here, and all those keys have a value. And if this is kind of flying over your head, if you're newer, there's a lot of different data types inside of JavaScript, and we have strings, which I showed you, John, Wall, point guard, everything in quotes. We have integers, numbers. We have booleans, which are true and false. And there's arrays and objects. So there's a couple different things that you can assign a variable to be. And we have set this to be an object. You can tell because it has these curly braces, and objects have key value pairs. The key is the thing to the left side before the semicolon, and the value is on the right side. This is essentially, all of these keys are essentially variables. You can think of it in that way, that they're kind of variables that have a value as well. And so let's say we want to make an update here. Well, I've told you that you cannot change the value of a const variable. However, that is true. You can't change the value of the object, but you can change the value of the keys. So here I'm going to show you that you can change active to false. Let's say John Wall's on the bench. To do that, I would just say player1 active. I'll set it to false. And there we go. It says false. If I were to take a look at player1 again, we're going to see that active is now changed to false, where before it was true. So as I said, this is why I say it's semi-immutable and not all the way immutable. This is still great. It still doesn't allow you to redeclare variables. It doesn't allow you to overwrite variables. Whenever you're working with variables using Const and Let, you should have less bugs in your code. It allows you, it doesn't allow you to introduce as many bugs as you introduced when you were just using var. So, yeah, as a recap, always use Const and Let. They're immensely better than using var. I'll see if I can find a good article on Const and Let. The link in the description. If you have any questions, let me know. You can always leave that in the comments. You can tweet me. My Twitter is @QuackCoachFire. And if this video helped you out, go ahead and drop a like there. And sub to the channel if you aren't already subbed. I'd greatly appreciate it. It goes a long way. And I have more videos coming for you in the future. Hope you enjoyed.